Hello, welcome everybody. Bienvenidos, bienvenue tous. Today we have a very interesting topic to discuss. A magnificent panelist. Investments in Brazil is our topic, but from an American, Asian, and European perspective. This is one more example on how new technologies are helping us, helping UIA to be close to its members through this webinar. And I'm very grateful to all the speakers and also to people attending. But I would like to give special thanks to our ambassadors. I would like to thank Abreu Advogados, Shemuli, Munger, Tolls and Olson, Luis Brisbois, Cheskai, Uria Menendez, and our dear friends Ahmed Ba, Yumana Bebehani, Ignacio Corvera, Ian de Freitas, François Moïse, Pedro País de Almeida, and our dear Jerry, Roth, and Jackie Scott. And I would like to give now the floor to Carlos José Santos da Silva. Thank you very much. I'm afraid you have to put the microphone, Carlos.
Sorry. Thank you, Jorge. Initially, I would like to thank you, two people, special people. The recent elected President Jorge Martí Moreno and partner to Uria Menendez, and the Jerry Roth. Jerry, your support for the Brazilian committee the beginning is fundamental. It's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, good morning and good afternoon to all. Today is a very special day occasion. We can hold the first webinar organized by the National Committee of the UIA in Brazil. Well, my name is Carlos José, but everyone calls me KG. I'm a partner at Machado Meyer Advogados and the president of CESA, Center for the Study of Law Firms, one association that brings together more than 1,000 law firms in Brazil, and vice president of the Brazilian UIA committee. The theme for our seminar is great importance and interest for Brazil. Brazil can be a great opportunity for investors. We are a poor country that needs a lot of investments in the infrastructure, water, sanitation, energy, logistics, gas and oil, roads, ports, are some examples. You know, in the view of the exchange rate variation, assets in Brazil are cheap at the moment. This is the time to invest. For this webinar, we have a moderator, Ettore BOTTESELLI. Ettore, let's go.
Thank you, Kajé. And as you mentioned, this is a very important day for the Brazilian committee. We are having our first webinar, which we had the pleasure to organize with the Foreign Investment Committee of UIA. And I would like to thank you, Eduardo Lorenzetti, for all the help and support. And I would say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, as we are having people from all over the world as speakers and also as attendees, people from Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, America, and South America also, and Oceania. And also a thank you to Jerry and Yoshi. Jerry, good morning, because it's 6 a.m. there in San Francisco. And to Yoshi, because it's 11 p.m. in Tokyo. And a special thank you for all the speakers, and especially for Jorge, our president, and for Jerry, our immediate past president. And before we start, Jerry, a special thank for all the support that you had gave to the Brazilian committee, and also congratulate you for the presidency and all the hard work that you have done last year and this year as UIA president, especially during this very difficult time with the COVID-19. Thank you to you all. I hope you can enjoy the subject and the discussions that we're going to have, especially nowadays in which Brazil, as one of the largest economies in the world, is the center of a political, economy, and several other matters discussion. So, Jerry, I give the floor to you. Please.
Thank you so much, Ettore. Thank you, Kajé, and thank you, Jorge. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here, albeit at 6 o'clock in the morning in San Francisco, as Ettore mentioned. But the Brazil Committee has always meant a lot to me. Brazil has meant a lot to me over the course of my career. And so I am so thrilled that your committee is so vibrant, and I could not be more delighted to be here talking about investments in Brazil this morning. Now, I am a litigator, not a corporate lawyer, but I have done quite a bit of litigation in Brazil. My firm does investment M&A work in Brazil. And so I have a pretty strong sense of the country and of the investment opportunities and culture and environment in Brazil. Obviously, the United States and Brazil have a long history together. The United States has always considered Brazil to be a major place to place its foreign investments, not only in business, but also in capital markets. There's a huge amount of back and forth business sales going between the two countries. I think it's fair to say the United States is a critically important investor in Brazil. I tried to find some figures. Everywhere you look has different figures, to be honest, but some of the figures I found suggested that in 2019, there were $82 billion in US investment in Brazil. It was about a quarter of Brazil's foreign direct investment last year. As you all know, the United States is going through a strange period right now. And by that, I mean these particular weeks where we're between two presidencies. We have a new president-elect, although the former president doesn't seem to recognize that. However, it's worth saying that the Trump administration had a favorable, very favorable relationship with Brazil. President Trump obviously had a good personal relationship with your president. And I think that over the past several years, that has helped the investment environment in Brazil. There have been several initiatives under President Trump. There was just this past September, there was a working group under an initiative called Grown in the Americas to strengthen infrastructure investment in Brazil. Just this past October, last month, there was a new protocol relating to trade rules and transparency, updating an agreement from 2011. Beyond President Trump, there's a long history. You're in the Western Hemisphere as we are. You have many similarities to the United States, a strong history of immigration. You're very multicultural. You're blessed with wonderful natural resources. You have a stable political environment relatively. As in the United States, we have a relatively stable political environment, one that is tested from time to time. And it's an enormous market, given your size, your population, and your importance on the global scene. Just from a personal point of view, let me add also, I know Americans love working with Brazilians. I have always loved working with Brazilians. There's an openness and an informality, a warmth that develops very quickly. And I know there's strong personal relationships are very easy to develop with our Brazilian colleagues, which I think creates a more favorable investment opportunity as well. But things are changing. We do have a new president-elect, and soon we should have a new president, President Joe Biden. And I think that presents opportunities for Brazil and the United States in terms of investment, as well as some challenges. The challenges are obvious. We're both dealing with the coronavirus right now. The United States has not done very well with it. I think we're still at the top of the list of the most cases in the world. But Brazil is not too far down on the list in terms of number of cases. Although the number itself is much lower, I think you're in the top 4 as well. That's a challenge we both have to deal with, and it's a challenge in the investment world as well. The Biden administration is going to be very dedicated on FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act issues and corruption issues. And so that is going to play an important role going forward once we have our new president installed, a more important role, I believe, than it has under President Trump, who was not a fan of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and under whom prosecution and investigation with respect to corruption issues was reduced. That's going to start back up again. And the legal community in the United States is very aware of that. Perhaps the most important issue that will be changing are issues relating to the environment. President-elect Biden is going to be very dedicated to environmental issues, much more so than President Trump, relating to climate change, relating to preservation and protection of the environment. That has been an ongoing issue between the United States and Brazil for years. And I think it will move to a new level of discussions, opportunities, but also some tensions, I expect, between President Biden and the current administration in Brazil. There are human rights issues that continue to be important and will be more important under President Biden than they were under President Trump. We just heard from, we just had a wonderful seminar at which we had a recommendation from Ettore, a wonderful speaker from Brazil, Tiago Amparo, a professor who talks about human rights issues in Brazil, racial issues, ethnic issues, LGBT issues. Those are going to come to the forefront. And I think President Biden and the United States is going to be putting an emphasis on those issues to make sure that Brazil and the United States are on the same page, so to speak, on some of these very important issues that have not been as important, if I can say that, under President Trump. So I think there are some challenges coming up. On the other hand, I think there is a potential benefit, and this is a little bit controversial, but I'm going to say it because I believe it. I think President Trump has adopted a bit of us versus them mentality. Either you're with us or you're against us. Either you're with the United States and against other major investors, and I'll just say it, like China and other major investors around the world, but particularly China, or you're against us. I don't think that will be the case under President Biden, and I've read quite a bit about this. I think President Biden is going to be more of the mindset of competing fairly with our competitors around the world, but not adopting this you're with us or against us mentality. And I think that could be a benefit with respect to our relationship with Brazil going forward. Let me come back to one of the points I mentioned. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, as many of you know, is one of the most important statutes invoked by the Department of Justice. It was very important under President Obama. It will be again very important under President Biden. I think it's fair to say that some of what occurred in Brazil in the past 5 years was of concern to American authorities with respect to corruption issues. Obviously, Operation Car Wash and the involvement of your former president, and the involvement of Petrobras, and all of the things that you're more familiar with than I am, but that made certainly got attention in the United States, are going to have to be dealt with and confronted. And I know that Brazil is working to confront these issues as well. I think that's going to take a very high priority in the in the years that come. Another issue that's going to take priority, because we're dealing with it in the United States, is the issue of infrastructure. It's not surprising to me that one of the recent relationships between the United States and Brazil relates to infrastructure, because that is really the creation of an increased infrastructure around the country. That has always been seen as an issue that Brazil needs to continue to work on, as we need to work on in the United States, where our infrastructure is crumbling around us. And I think as we focus in the United States on infrastructure issues, I believe that there will be increased focus on infrastructure issues in Brazil with respect to investment opportunities. As a litigator, I want to sort of talk about my personal perspective, and I've heard this reflected as well. I think Brazil is seen as an extremely legalistic country, in the sense that it has many, many laws and regulations. It has many, many excellent lawyers. I'm honored and pleased to be friends with, I can't say all of them, but many of them around the country. And I have worked with so many wonderful firms and lawyers around the country in my career. But part of the reason we do that is because there is such a deep legal culture in Brazil. And we see it reflected in laws relating to customs, laws relating to taxation, regulatory laws about doing business and investing in the country. I think there's going to be enhanced focus on those issues. Those can sometimes be surprising to United States investors, and certainly surprising when a problem occurs and they find themselves in the need of a Brazilian lawyer to deal with legal issues in Brazil. And that's where I'd like to bring my personal experience to bear. As I've talked about with Ettore and others, I have been involved in litigation in Brazil, and can give the perspective of what it looks like from the American perspective and from the American company perspective, who are, or other non-Brazilian companies who are dealing with issues in Brazil. And once you have a problem, that is when you perceive this, a couple of issues. One is a vast array of regulations that are interlocking, interweb, and quite complicated and very, very difficult to work through. I know Brazil is obviously a civil code country, not a common law country like the United States. That's an issue we can get past. But once we get into what those codes provide, it can be a real thicket, so to speak, for a US investor to navigate. And sometimes that only becomes apparent when a problem arises, but it sure becomes apparent at that point. The other, couple of other issues I've perceived that I think lawyers can play a really important role in helping US investors navigate is there is a vast array of different federal and state agencies, just as we have in the United States, that have to be navigated in Brazil once a problem arises. You have to deal with a huge lineup of federal authorities as well as state authorities, often competing for resources, competing for attention, competing for PR, public relations successes, with different priorities. That can be a surprise and can be a challenge for US investors. I can't deny that we have the same situation in the United States, but there is a sense when you are in a foreign country to an American that it is more challenging when you're dealing with these this vast array of agencies and their own internal competition. The other issue that I think is absolutely critical is there are some aspects of the legal system that can be surprising to American companies. One is I'm just being frank here, there is sometimes a hint, I won't say it's the case, but there is at least a hint of the possibility of whether there is corruption in the judicial system. I have had experiences where I have had things said to me about how a case could be handled by a particular judge, et cetera. I can't draw conclusions about it, but it raises at least an issue. But what I have seen, and I think is a recognized aspect, is that in Brazil, there are more direct conversations with judges than we have in the United States. And I know that is an accepted part of Brazilian practice, that you can go. I used to work with my Brazilian colleagues who would say, oh, we're going to go down and talk to the judge in a meeting, sit at his or her desk and talk about the case without the other side present, which is something in the United States system you really would not say or cannot do, but I know is an accepted part of Brazilian practice. I think the main point is that Brazilian lawyers can play a huge role in helping US investors understand this different environment. They have to play the role of letting US investors know what is right and acceptable under Brazilian law and what is wrong and not acceptable. They have to help United States investors sort of get through and work their way through this complicated web of agencies, statutes, concerns about different stakeholders, and the PR impacts and the news impacts. And I have to say, I believe this is something that, from my perspective, should be done more in advance of, or at the time that a US investor is becoming involved in Brazil, than when a problem arises. By the time a problem arises, you're often operating in a crisis situation, you're making decisions quickly, you're sending lawyers or running around all over the place. I think lawyers in Brazil could play a huge role in helping American investors understand the investment environment and the legal environment should a problem arise in advance, so that investors can have a better understanding of what the world they're getting into and how they can be expected to deal with it. And I think once that happens, I believe that US investors can deal with all of the issues that I have seen folks deal with. The reason for this web of laws and regulations and agencies is because, in large part, Brazil is trying to protect the very issues that the United States believes to be important, such as the environment, such as anti-corruption. So there's a bit of a tension between complaining about too many laws and too many judges and too many agencies on the one hand, but saying, oh, and we want you, by the way, to have strict environmental rules and strict anti-corruption rules. I get that tension. I think a lot of it could be dealt with by lawyers talking with their colleagues across the border, as we're doing right now, and anticipating these issues and working on them beforehand. And I would not limit it to the corporate lawyers. The corporate lawyers are often interested in the terms of the deal, and they should be. That's what they're focused on. I think it should be a broader discussion that anticipates potential legal problems and that allows the United States to enter and continue being a major partner with Brazil in investment, but with awareness of what they will need to deal with so that these things don't come as a surprise during a case when everybody is running around in a panic. So I'll end with that. That's my perspective. As I've said, I cannot wait for COVID to be over so that I can come back and visit my Brazilian colleagues and spend some time in Rio, Sao Paulo, and all the other cities in Brazil that I have so loved visiting. Until then, it's a real pleasure to be with all of you here on my little screen in front of me. Thank you very much, Ettore.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you for sharing all of your experience with us. It was very valued and important. And as you mentioned, there are some very important matters that Brazil needs to work, especially FCPA, matter of anti-corruption, and also the environment, especially now with President-elect Biden, how the Brazilian politician and how the Brazilian policy is going to change with the new president in the US, what is very important for all of us. So moving forward to our next speaker, Yoshi, just as a quick reminder, if someone has any questions, please just write down in the item Q&A, and we are gonna ask to the speakers all the questions in the end of our panel. Thank you. Yoshi, please. Thank you, Jerry. Yoshi.
Thank you. I'm going to turn off my video now. Thank you.
So thank you very much. And I'm Yoshihisa Hayakawa. I'm just now president of UIA National Committee in Japan, and I'm member of the Foreign Investment Committee of UIA. I try to move my slide. Yes. So today I'd like to say something about Japanese perspective about investment in Brazil. So first I'd like to explain about a brief history of the relationship between Brazil and Japan. And additionally, I'd like to explain the present situation of Japanese society and how investment in emerging market is important in the Japanese business corporations. And thirdly, I'd like to mention about some risks or some concerns of Japanese business corporations about the investment in Brazil, not only Brazil, but also the emerging markets in general. And fourthly, I'd like to, how my law firm or me, myself, try to advise our client, Japanese business corporations, for the legal strategy for the risk hedge of the investment in emerging markets. And especially, I'd like to pick up the 3 points, the bribery issues and the dispute resolution and the regulation changes. So the first, I'd like to explain about the brief history of the relationship between Brazil and Japan. And at the beginning of the 20th century, so before that time, we experienced the very important revolution in Japan, which was called Meiji Revolution, and we tried to change our society structure completely. But so many people would like to get success, and so some of them try to go Brazil to get success or to get their own land. And so the left side picture is people who, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. The left side picture is the many Japanese people now try to, across the ocean and try to move to Brazil. And so the center picture is that they worked in the coffee farms at that time. But soon they realized they were treated as slaves in the farmland. And they escaped from the coffee farm, and they tried to move to the city of, for example, São Paulo, and they tried to start their own shops, grocery shop or laundry or something, and they they work hard and they try to get their success. And many Brazilians knows about, that there are kind of the Japanese community in São Paulo, and there are so many Japanese Brazilians now living in São Paulo and other cities in Brazil. So we have a very long time history between Japan and Brazil. So let me explain about the present Japanese society and the investment in emerging markets. So the blue and pink parts of this chart is the Japanese population, how constitute Japanese populations. So unfortunately, we are facing the problem of the declining birth rate. And so we are now becoming, our society is becoming the aging society. And it means our population itself is shrinking. And so the younger people are relatively, very limited number. So it means our domestic market is unfortunately now shrinking. So it means the Japanese business corporation can survive only selling something to the foreign markets, not only Japanese domestic market, but also the foreign market. So the foreign market is very important nowadays for Japanese business corporations. So such a shrinking population is also leading to the lack of the enough number of the essential workers. So perhaps 3 decades before, we started to accept Brazilian workers of Japanese descent, and so we are now happily live together in Japanese island. But of course, at the same time, we are facing some problems. The one problem is, of course, the economy is sometimes good and sometimes bad. And at the bad time, recession time, they had to face unemployment situations. So this is one of the problems we are facing. And additionally, many of the such as Japanese Brazilians cannot speak Japanese language, at least at the time of the coming to Japan. And so they, of course, brought their family, and the family do not speak Japanese language. And the culture is quite different. And their faces are very similar to the Japanese people's, but mentality or personality is completely different. You can easily imagine. So we are always facing some kind of the cultural gaps, and we have to prepare the special educational program for the Japanese Brazilians for the English, Japanese language as a second language. So we have to establish the special school class. But this is not the topic of today. So now Japanese business corporation have plenty of the deposit, and we are always looking for the market to be invested. And the right side chart is the economic growth of the developed state and the emerging states. So it's obvious the emerging states, the growth rate is very brilliant. So the target should be an emerging market, including Brazil. And this is a ratio of the overseas sales, manufacture, and benefit of the Japanese corporations. So in these 20 years, so the 2 decades, so the ratio is becoming from 25% to the almost 40%. So we are deeply rely on the foreign market nowadays. And so investment in emerging market is very important for Japanese business corporations. But at present, the investment were made mainly in Asian country next to Japan. And Latin America country is not so big existence for the Japanese business corporations at present. So of course, as an investment field lawyer, we always encourage our client not to hesitate to investment in Brazil and other Latin American countries. But Japanese business corporations sometimes very hesitate to invest, and they have some kind of concern, not only for the Brazil, but also for the emerging markets in Latin American country in general. So what is the concern of the Japanese business corporations? And I'd like to let you know about some anecdote or some actual experience of my clients. So one of my clients, Japanese meat product company, this is the biggest one in Japan, and it tried to run a stock farm in Brazil. So they, of course, always import meat. And they realized, okay, we should run a stock farm by ourselves in the foreign countries. And so one of the option is Brazil. And they actually try to start their own stock farm in Brazil. And after the ceremony of the opening day, at the night of the opening day, all the cattle and the pigs were stolen. All gone. So our clients are so surprised because in Japan, at least, such thing never happened. So they are shocked and they gave up this project at one day. So that is unfortunately true story of my clients. Another one is it could be too the aggressive reaction, but so one of the my friend who was sent to the Japanese business corporation office in Brazil. So the Japanese business corporation sent one Japanese employee to its office in Brazil with his family, and it was recommended the bulletproof vests should be prepared even for his children. So he was very shocked, and but he finally tried to find it, and he prepared it. I don't know. This is too aggressive reaction, too much reaction, but so it's a true story as well. And so that is one of the another anecdote of our client who would like to invest in Brazil. But this is only just the specific stories. But in general, Japanese business corporation having a kind of the concern about the risk in investment in emerging countries, not only for the Brazil, but also for the emerging market country in general, and especially for three things. One is the bribery issues. So they would like to avoid to be involved in the kind of the bribe competition. And in some emerging markets, unfortunately, they sometimes have to be involved in the bribe competition. If they refuse to give some kind of bribe to the foreign officials, it means they will lose that project. But so they do not want to, but finally they hesitate, but they did the giving the bribe to the foreign officials. But that is a very dangerous, and that is infringing of the compliance of the Japanese regulations. So that is one big problem, investment in emerging markets. Another problem is dispute resolution in the local courts. So sometimes some local courts judge. I'm not talking about Brazil, but some emerging markets, unfortunately, the judges are not so equal to the foreign investors. So they had to survive tough litigation in the local court if some problem happened in the investment. And another tough problem is the sudden change of the regulations or sudden change of the political environments. So sometimes they relied on the one leader and the leader made some kind of the regulation which is preferable to them. but political leader changed, everything changed. And they had to lose that project or all of the benefit. So that is another incident to be considered to remove the concern of the Japanese business corporations. But of course, that we always, as a lawyer in the investment fields, try to propose some kind of the legal strategy to hedge the risk of this kind of. So one of the legal strategy for the risk hedge of the investment bribery issue is the strategic use of the extraterritorial application of anti-bribery regulations of Japan and or the third countries, especially United States, including the way of the whistleblowing. So first of all, the Japan have unfair competition provision, which includes the provision of the prohibiting the giving the bribe to the foreign officials. So unfortunately, there are many cases, even in Japan, this law was applied to the Japanese business corporations, which tried to or actually gave the bribes to the foreign nationals in especially the Southeastern Asian countries. But much more powerful tool is the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practice Act of the United States, and related laws for wire fraud or related laws for the money laundering of the United States. So there are so many cases. So the United States DOJ worked for the third countries business corporations giving bribe to the other countries, the foreign nationals, foreign officer. And so we encourage our client to strategically use these systems, especially using the whistleblowing. So sometimes they were involved in the kind of the bribe competition. But we encourage them to whistleblow and try to leak some information to the United States authority, and there might be the bribe competition. And so our rival company is about to give the bribe to the foreign nationals, foreign officials. So this kind of strategy is one of the new one which would like to avoid this risk. And additionally, for the dispute resolution, arbitration is one of the best solution as a tool for the dispute resolution in the emerging markets. And from this viewpoint, Brazil became a member of New York Convention in 2002. And honestly speaking, in the 20th century, and I was a young lawyer, and at that time, and it is one of the mystery for me, why Brazil was not a member of the New York Convention. But in 2002, the Brazil became the member of the New York Convention. So there is no concern about this from the Japanese viewpoint. And additionally, we sometimes review the Arbitration Act of Brazil, and it was not a copy. It was not a copy of the ancestral model law, but the substance is not so different. So we could safely rely on the Arbitration Act of Brazil. And additionally, it was revised in 2015, and so we really appreciate to rely on the Brazilian legal scheme for the arbitrations. And additionally, the Latin America Office of International Court of Arbitration of ICC was opened at Sao Paulo in 2017. So this is very symbolic. And so from this, for this issue, the Brazil is one of the best countries in emerging markets, we can rely on. But finally, yes, so for the sudden change of the regulation or sudden change of the political the systems, political leaderships. So we encouraged always our clients try to strategically use the investment treaties or investment protection treaties. And I may be wrong, but Brazil had a long time not experienced the bilateral investment protection treaties with any state. But recently, for example, Brazil has concluded APEC, Agreement on Trade and Economic Cooperation with the US in this year. And so the Japanese business society also tried to encourage Brazil. So Brazil-Japan Business Council declared their dedicated efforts to conclude the Japan-Mercosur EPA in 2019. It was not yet achieved, but the efforts is continuing. But I think the one of the concerns that Brazil has not yet become a member of Washington Convention for ICSID, investor-state arbitration. So this is one of the elements to be considered when we calculate the kind of the risk of investment in the emerging markets. So I'm not sure Brazil has not yet, but if so, it is one of the still concern for the Business Corporation of Japan. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation, and so the questions would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yoshi, and thank you for being waking up so late. It was a very broad and detailed presentation. Of course, that we don't need to wear bulletproof vests in Brazil. It's not necessary. But as you mentioned, and also as was highlighted by Jerry, the anti-corruption and policy and bribery matters are something very important, how foreign investments see their investments in Brazil, and they are concerned also about the enforcement of judicial decisions. And that's why it was also important the ratification of the New York Convention by Brazil about the enforcement of arbitration awards. Thank you very much, Yoshi. Now moving forward to Europe, to Italy, to Eduardo Lorenzetti, who is the president of the Foreign Investment Committee of UIA and also a lawyer in Milan. Eduardo, please, you have the floor. Thank you, Yoshi.
Good morning, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ettore, for inviting our Foreign Investment Commission to participate on the organization of the webinar with the Brazilian committee. Well, first of all, before starting my presentation, I think I should give a sort of disclaimer, because although I'll be speaking about a European perspective, I'm also Brazilian national. So the reason for that, as Ettore said, okay, I live and I work and I am an Italian qualified lawyer, and the fact is that I have always had a very personal and professional European life, in the sense that I did part of my law studies in Italy, and I am an Italian qualified lawyer. I worked in London also for 3 years, and I studied there. I worked in the Netherlands. I am a qualified Portuguese lawyer, and I have some practice there. And from my Brazilian side, where I was brought up, and I'm also a qualified Brazilian lawyer, I have always worked for foreign investors, and most of them from a European origin. So when Ettore asked, well, can you speak about a European perspective? I said, well, what can I speak about? And then I thought, actually, the presentation here is not going, okay, thank you very much. So I thought of speaking about cultural aspects, some tips to Brazilian lawyers about European colleagues and investors, and tips to European lawyers about Brazilian colleagues and the country. I mean, it's not a very technical lecture, if you want. It's a chat between colleagues. I may run the risk of falling into commonplaces, but I really intend to give some piece of advice to European lawyers that are coming to Brazil, how to deal with some situations, and also to some to Brazilian lawyers about how to deal with the European colleagues and take the most out of this encounter between two kinds of cultures or civilizations. So I'm starting giving some tips to Brazilian lawyers about European colleagues and investors. I'll be talking about the Brazilian image abroad, about some European historical preconceptions, some European idiosyncrasies, and the currency moment, which is very important for investment anyway. So let's start with the Brazilian image abroad. Well, that was a brilliant moment. The golden age for foreign investment in Brazil, and The Economist, just in its cover page, puts Brazil takes off. We were during Lula's period. And I have to say that I've been working in this area for about 30 years. And before 2019, Brazil was very much seen abroad as the sleeping giant of South America. But from 2009 or 8 on, Brazil actually became a very important player in the world, and nobody can say that Brazil is a blur image. Everybody has to know about Brazil. And in 2009, it was very good to work for foreign investors because everybody wanted to come to Brazil. It was when Obama said about Lula, this is the guy. That was the period when Brazil ran and won the race for the World Cup, the Olympic Games. Brazil became one of the BRICS countries, and everybody just spoke about Brazil. Well, as we know, has Brazil blown it? 4 years afterward, was not too long, I'm afraid. And since then, Brazilian image is not the same as before. We Brazilian lawyers that work with foreign investment have to be aware of that. We are not in 2019 anymore. We have Mr. Bolsonaro. We have problems with the Amazon. We have problems dealing with the pandemic. So the Brazilian image abroad is not as good as it could be, or it should be, as I'll be talking afterwards. And that is something that the Brazilian lawyers have to be aware of. And what I mean about European historical preconception, well, Jerry spoke a little bit about that, and also Yoshi, and they are not Europeans. The fact is that when, let's say, an Italian lawyer goes to New York or to California to meet Jerry, or to Tokyo to meet Yoshi, or to my law firm in São Paulo, to any of these, when he goes to this law firm, he comes with some preconception that thinks that he has been hearing since he was a kid, or now in the TV or in the news every day. And what is the preconception about Brazil? What's the European preconception about Brazil? Well, Brazil is in Latin America. Latin America has an image of corruption. It has an image of poverty, urban violence. Education is not a very good level. So Europeans come with this mind to meet you, Brazilian lawyer. So my piece of advice is actually take into consideration that and dedicate your time a little bit more to your European colleague, being as clear as possible, as fast as possible, as detailed as possible, be precise. I mean, it will pay off. I mean, when he will see that you are very well qualified, responsible professional, he will never leave you again. He will fall in love with you. He will work with you for many years. He will tell you about other colleagues, but dedicate your time a little bit more, especially to be transparent, to be clear, to be precise, to be on time. It will actually pay off. Another thing is the European idiosyncrasies. Well, you know, in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese especially, we are all the time talking about você, which is you. In the European culture, you know, in Spanish is usted, in French is vous, in Italian is lei. I mean, Europeans are very formal, and we Brazilians are very informal. So, especially in the first times, try not to be so nice, try not to be so informal, because I think that is good also to start a relationship. At the beginning, it's good to be more formal. The currency moment, well, the currency moment is that 5 years, 100%. I mean, Brazil in January 2015, €1 bought 3 reais. Now, €1 buys more than 6 reais. So this is a piece of advice to our Brazilian colleagues. Take in consideration that before telling your fees, actually, because I know, I mean, normally we Brazilians, when we are working with foreign colleagues, our rate is already in dollar or in euros. But I don't know, in the day-by-day work, maybe you talk to your litigation colleague and ask, well, how much do you think we should charge for this lawsuit? And maybe he says, 50,000 reais, and 50,000 reais sounds nice, but in euro is nothing. I mean, our currency is so low at this moment that before selling your work, try to think in euro, because if you sell your services in reais, you are losing the opportunity. You are missing the opportunity, actually, and maybe you are selling your work too cheap. Now is the other side of the coin, tips to European lawyers about Brazilian colleagues and the country. Again, Brazilian image. Well, Brazilian image is very bad at this moment. Again, I mean, much of that is a stereotype, is not true. I mean, Brazil has always been amongst the biggest 10th economy in the world. It has even for a couple of years been the 7th economy in the world when it overcame Italy. Now it's the 9th economy. It has the 7th consumer market in the world, the 10th consumer e-market in the world, the 5th work population. I mean, the Brazilian economy is vibrant. The Brazilian economy is stable and very strong. I mean, I could tell you many examples of European companies that come to Brazil and have extremely good result in their investments because we have a vibrant environment to do business in. So don't let you be touched by this stereotype. The Brazilian economy and Brazilian investments are really a good opportunity. Again, European preconception. Well, here I'm talking about European preconception about Brazilian lawyers. In which sense? Well, since Brazil is a Latin American country, and since Brazil specifically, education has a not very good level, and in Europe, the education has a very good level, some European colleagues may tend to think that the Brazilian lawyers are less qualified than the European lawyer. That's not absolutely true. I mean, it's true that if we compare the two countries, or the Brazilian country with European countries, the education in Europe is much better. But we are not talking about Brazilian in general. Actually, Brazilian has not a very good wealth distribution. And we are the people that you are going to meet, the people that will be your lawyers in Brazil, they are part of 5% of the Brazilian population. And these guys have a very good education. Since they were kids, they were in schools, very good schools. They went to brilliant faculty of laws. They had foreign experience, working experience, study experience in abroad. They speak many languages. The Brazilian law firms, and they are indeed Brazilian law firms, because in Brazil, we have just Brazilian law firms. We cannot have foreign law firms in Brazil. The Brazilian law firms are a mixture of European law firms with American law firms, because they had a very American influence. So when you get in the Brazilian law firms, you will feel again a very vibrant atmosphere. They are very professional. So let your preconception at home and open your heart and your mind to the Brazilian lawyers. You see they are very good. Brazilian idiosyncrasies. I talked about the European idiosyncrasies, that they are very formal. Now I talk about the Brazilian idiosyncrasies. They are very informal. They are very relaxed. So again, this is a tip to the European lawyers. Don't get it wrong. I mean, Brazilians are very relaxed. They are very warm. They are very open. They want to be nice to you. So don't mix things. I mean, they are not doing that because they are not very good professionals, because they are not serious professionals. This is just part of our culture. Another thing about Brazilian idiosyncrasies that I think is that Brazilians are so nice that they have difficult to say no, looking at your face and say, no, I don't want that. I mean, they try to turn around, they try to take some time, not to be so indelicate to say no. So in negotiations and in deals, take it also in consideration, you know, that Brazilians are very nice people, and sometimes even to say no is not that easy. Currency moment, again, that's true to one side of the coin, it's true to the another side of the coin. I mean, you European colleagues, probably you were paying, I don't know, 10,000 euros 5 years ago. It represented 30,000 reais at that moment. Now, if you pay 10,000 euros, it's more than 60,000 reais. And believe me, Brazilian inflation was not 100% during this period, maybe 15, I don't know, very little. So, I mean, you have a lot of room for negotiation, even the legal fees, because you come with a very strong currency. My partners in Brazil should be killing me in this moment, but that's the truth. If you come with dollar or euro, not only to, of course, that's not the main point, but also to pay fees, you have a lot of power in your hands. Finally, still tips to European lawyers. Now, some Brazilian practical issues. First of all, hire a Brazilian lawyer, mandatory. Well, Jerry said that already. I mean, don't do that. Don't come to Brazil. It's just because it's an agreement and you are a foreign lawyer and you say, okay, it's an agreement. I mean, people just need to agree about, I mean, no, you always need to hire a Brazilian lawyer. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. Brazilian law is very complex and you need to be combined with a local attorney. How to hire a Brazilian lawyer? Well, as many people know, we have in Brazil 1,200,000 lawyers. It's the second in the world and the first one per capita. So we have a lot of lawyers. I mean, Brazil, differently from other Latin American countries, you have to do an examination to become a lawyer. So I would say the Brazilian lawyers in general, they have a very good level, but it's still 1,200,000. 200,000, it's a lot. I strongly recommend you to hire a Brazilian lawyer under some kind of referral. You may use the UIA for that. You may use Chamber of Commerce. You may use consulate. It's good to do some screening before hiring a Brazilian lawyer. Local accountant. The local accountant is necessary many times. The Brazilian accountant is called contador. But I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, we have 600,000 contadores in Brazil, which is a lot again. But the Brazilian contador is, well, in my opinion, generally speaking, he's more a bookkeeper than an accountant in the US or in the UK, or a commercialista in Italy, or expert comptable in France, or a contador in Spain. I mean, so take care. I mean, as far as tax is concerned, it's better to talk with a lawyer. It's my suggestion. And to finish, if we have two areas of law that I would suggest you to have special attention. Labor law. Labor is always an area that is complicated when you go to a foreign country, but in Brazil, that is especially true. Brazil is the world champion in litigation in case of labor suits. Brazil had a very, very important reform of the labor law 3 years ago, but still, even in 2019, we had in course 1.5 million law cases. So law is an area that you should always take care, a lot of care. And tax law. The Brazilian legislation, as far as tax law is concerned, my God, it's very difficult even for Brazilian tax lawyers. As you can see in the famous World Bank rank doing business, Brazil is almost the last country in the world in terms of complexity for paying taxes. So even if you are an expert in your country in tax law and even have a very good understanding and experience in international tax law, please be with a Brazilian tax lawyer, not an accountant, a lawyer is extremely recommended. Well, I'm finishing. The last thing that I would like to say is that in the Italian Chamber of Commerce in São Paulo, we had a former president, Eduardo Polassi, who was president for 10 years, more than 10 years actually. And he used to say that Brasile sembra facile, è difficile, ma ne vale la pena. Brazil seems very easy. It's very hard, but it's worth it. I think that his words explains very well what is doing business in Brazil. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you for showing us all your experience, especially between Europe and Brazil, and detailing all the different customs between both Brazil and Europe. It was very important, and I believe that it was very elucidative to all our viewers. And now moving forward to Brazil, we have Flavia, who is a partner in a Brazilian law firm, and she's specialized in environmental, agriculture, and regulatory matters, which is one of the main topics that are being discussed here today and also around the world in relation to Brazil. So Flavia, you have the floor, and Eduardo, thank you for your contribution.
Thank you, Ettore. Thank you guys for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here, and I hope I can have a chance to take part in these discussions a little more often. So as Ettore has mentioned, I'm a partner at the DDSA. I started my career working at PricewaterhouseCoopers, so I always want to see a little bit beyond the legal terms and what we had to expect in terms of what was the purpose of the law and how we could fix things which was going on and why things were like they were, right? So I know that many have been said here in terms of what to expect in Brazil. Of course, that 2020 was not a very typical year in terms of what to expect, and a lot of things which were in the pipeline has been changed a little bit, the course of action that we have here in Brazil. And it's true that we are struggling with a big deal of things. We have a sanitary crisis as the entire world, and we are struggling also with the environmental matters and the deforestation and the fires that we have been seeing and which has been taking all the news. So let me see if I can move here to the other. I'm not being able to change here. Oh, there you are. So as many of you have said, and it was interesting to see how Brazil is viewed under the perspective of other countries, right? And just answering here one of the questions or something that Jeff mentioned, Brazil has approximately 110 billion in direct investments in made out of the American funds, and much more coming from Europe and also from Asia. So a lot of our GDP is made of this foreign trade, right? So we have direct investment both in capital, equity, and also in loan and intercompany loans. But Brazil, it's a big country, one of the biggest economy. We have continental size. We have a population which is huge, and we have a lot of available natural resources. So with these things in hand, what did we do, right? Since we have declared back there our independence from our Portuguese government, we have been struggling with some things, right? So in first place, we have a big inequality, which is a result of different regional or areas or peculiarities. It's usual to listen that Brazil is made of different Brazils, right? And it's true. If you look in each region of Brazil, we have different we have different population, we have different sectors, which are the major ones. We have cultural aspects, which are very important in telling how we manage our country life together, right? So I think that we do have many of questions that we have to understand in order to understand Brazil, right? It's not depending on where you're doing business, depending where the sector you are doing business. So there are a lot of things that we have to deal with. It's also true that we have a very complex legal system, right? We have a complex legal system. We have a number of laws, specific laws, of course, that we are under a constitutional provisions, and of course that the states, they are free to legislate on some matters, but all of them will have always to seek for their legality and validity under the principles of the Constitution. And so we do have many legal areas, and one of the most difficult thing is to put them together and to harmonize them all. So when we are doing a business here in Brazil, and let's imagine when we're talking about some sort of agribusiness project, that sometimes it requires corporate, tax, labor, environmental, real estate. Sometimes we have very specific rules for each one of the areas. But when you have to put them together, and they have to be harmonic, they have to talk one to another. So one of the big problems that we have here is that it doesn't matter if you have a deal which is under the perspective that you have a corporate structure to put in place. You always will have to look and put together all this complex legal system so they would work at the end, right? We do have, of course, that export. It's a very important thing to Brazil, especially when we are talking about steel or when we're talking about agriculture or livestock. So we do have a very strong relationship with other countries, even though we still being a very, we export commodities and we buy a lot of consumer products, right? So this is something which is important to understand when we are looking to Brazil. Also, we have a lack of sustainable programs for environments which are protected. So even though we have a huge environmental system in terms of laws, right? And in terms of jurisdiction, and in terms of what prevails when we're talking about how to address some environmental matters, we have all the legislation that we have, they are protected. They want to keep our environment as is, even though we do have to find a way to find a sustainable programs that will turn the forest, for instance, in Amazonia, much more profitable than just putting fire on it, setting fire on the trees, or just selling the logs, you know? So we do not have many sustainable programs. So legislation is very narrow-minded and very old-fashioned. So you add up a problem when we are talking about these things, which is very important. Nobody thinks that we are going to be able to still having like and barriers or tariffs when we're talking about foreign trade if we do not take care of this sustainable agenda, right? And of course that we have also the fiscal debt. This is something that is being questioned a long term, and with the new government, even though it was it is a conservative president, everybody understood that the Congress was ready to make changes, and in fact they did, right? But we are seeing now that, especially with the pandemic situation and the sanitary crisis that it has established, all this reform programs, they have been put aside in some terms, right? And of course that we have all experience and the pandemic crisis that has created or has caused some effects here in Brazil. So let's go to the other one. What have we had in the past years, which was like legal news, right? Laws that was enacted that somehow has tried to taken care of the problems that I just talked about and the problems that we're facing, right? First of all, of course, that you know that we have the commercial treaty between European Union and Mercosur approved, right? So this was the first step that we had to take. Of course, that it has to be ratified by the European countries and also from the Mercosur ones. We know that they're going to approve. But what we are seeing now is that this first step was taken. It was very important to discuss barriers and tariffs that we were having been put in place in Brazilian goods. But we have to understand, going back again, that climate change, that sustainability is something which is in the agenda of all other countries that want to invest in Brazil. So there is no way that we are going to have the approval of our parties here in this treaty if we are not able to discuss these matters, right? Also, we had a labor reform that took place in 2017, and they have been being amended, or some additional changes has been taken in 2020. Many of them were related to the pandemic, but we understand that the changes which were made in 2020, they shall continue. This is interesting. Of course, that labor law here in Brazil, as Eduardo was saying, is something that you have to take care with. But the labor reform was very important to give more flexibility to the arrangements between companies and employees, or companies and the union. So this was very well, this was welcome. This was something that it was interesting, even to give some political and legal stability to investors. Also, we had the constitutional amendment, which was the first reform which was approved in this government here, which was the Social Security reform. It was expected to have 800 billion savings in payment of pension and retirement pension for in a 10-year term. Of course, that we have already touched the ceiling again in terms of expenditures, because with the COVID, our government has taken a different direction and used the pandemic crisis in order to make more expenditures. So this was supposed to give us some sort of relief, but we are seeing that this has already, is close to reach the top here, right? Also, and one of the biggest changes we have been seeing here was the Free Economic Act, which was a law that in terms of principles has not changed what we had in our federal constitution, but it brought a lot of changes to a labor, tax, regulatory aspect, or public law, and also civil law in terms of freedom of parties in order to discuss and in order to negotiate and in order to make the agreements available, enforceable. So it's like the Pax Sunt Servanda analysis. If this is not or against the common welfare, right? So this was one of the biggest and the most important, in my opinion, changes that we had in the recent years. And this was something that happened in 2019. And the reflect of the Free Economic Act we saw now in the pandemic, when many public and also civil arrangements were taken to court in terms of having like termination or reduction of the penalties or discussion of force majeure. So this was important. This was something that brought back some sort of stability, in legal stability and security in terms of making the agreements enforced, available to everyone, discussed, and we reduced a lot the prevailing of court precedents, which was something that it was very, it was a concern of our clients, especially the foreign ones. Also, we had in the something what's being discussed in the recent year was the Agro Act, which is some alternatives to financial lines and credit facilities for investors and also for companies, farmers, which they had like it's very limited, the sources of financial products that we have for the agribusiness here in Brazil. And we are a little late in terms of how our courts and the law sees the agribusinesses in Brazil. We are still focused in very small properties, in very small businesses, and we had to improve this to a higher level. We have to bring this farmers and this agribusiness to being on the same level to apply and to obtain some financial and loan or credit facilities, which was more related to the investor, not really to the producer. So this, we have not, of course, that this law has been questioned. There are some points which we have not understood yet how it's going to work, but it was a great sign that we're going to take another step when it comes to agribusinesses. And also, we had very recently here, the new regulatory framework for sanitation. Almost 80% of our residences here in Brazil are not served with a storage system, and half of it is served with a little more than half of it is served of water. So this requires a lot of investment. Of course, that it's not here in São Paulo. As I said, we have different Brazils inside Brazil, but this was something that will also put us in another level, right? Of course, that those, in my perspective, are the most relevant and important ones. But of course, that we have many others, right? I'm just mentioning this here because I think that this is an answer. I think that legally speaking, the reflex of a law, they answer some, demand or some requirements of our international relationship and also internally, right? So this is a response to what we have. So let's go to the next one and to understand a little bit, in my perspective, what is still missing and what we have to still deal with. Let me just make like a parenthesis here to mention that with COVID-19, there were several measures which was taken by the government, in especial to keep the agribusiness sector moving, right? It was an opportunity to have more exports to incentivize the foreign trade. So this was something that happened. We have a reduction in our expenditures here internally because, of course, that it was an increase in the unemployment, but now we are seeing a pent-up demand, as we say. So if you look at the construction sector, if you look at the agribusiness sector, if you look at several sectors in Brazil, we are seeing that they are trying to recover because there was like a demand which was suppressed, and now you have people spending more, even our partners abroad, right? So in terms of governmental policies, in order to, of course, besides the sanitary and the health ones, we did have some rules which provide for some postponement of taxes and labor duties, but
Flavia,
there was not much. Oh, yes.
Sorry, due to time, would you be able to conclude in 1 minute? Sorry
Yeah,
for interrupting you.
Sure. So let's go to the other one. So I think it's a good way to finish here. So what we expect and what we want to reach by now, especially with the recent with the recent election in the US, right? We understand that we have to discuss the tax and the administrative reform. One will have to work together with the other. We need what we call a pact between or amongst the states in order to avoid this crisis that we have, or a big fight between them. So this is something that we have to think of. I think this is going to be something that we're going to have to work with in the coming years, together with the control of our fiscal debt. Of course, that there's no way to delay or postpone the return to the Paris Act, and even the discussion of the sustainable programs for endangered environments. And when I say this, I put together in a block as the environmental issue that it's urgent and that we have to deal with. We have to start working not only in terms of legislation, but also in terms of litigation. Environmental litigation in Brazil, it's awful, doesn't solve the problem, doesn't fix the damage, but we still have a lot of ways to avoid the discussion and the solution of environmental matters. And I think that we are seeing the creation of a good legal background for the investment, for investment in infrastructure. So I think that looking today, I think this is what we expect to come, even to move us to the next level, you know. So of course that there were many other sectors that we could see in details, but in general terms, I think that that's the way we see it today.
Thank you very much, Flavia, and thank you for sharing with us all your experience dealing with foreign investments in Brazil, and all your experience also in regulatory and environmental fields, which are the main subject now related to foreign investments in Brazil. Mm-hmm. I really thank all the speakers for their time, especially for those who woke up very early or are going to bed very late. And just to finish, I believe that we don't have much time for the questions, so we are gonna send all the questions for the speakers so they'll be able to reply as soon as possible. And also thank you for the viewers, for Jorge for his presence, Jerry, Eduardo, Yoshi, Flavia, and Kajé. And Colette, thank you for all your help to putting this webinar and to help us to reach this tremendous success, reaching people from all over the world. Thank you for everyone, and please.
Muito obrigado, Ettore. Muito obrigado. So long.
Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, thank you.
Obrigado. Tchau, tchau. Tchau.